Well, Tana, what's on my mind this morning? I've been wanting to speak about this, but when I just came back, it was the election, and then last week I spoke about my return and what my journey meant. But something that I read in the newspaper a couple weeks ago, something from the Chief Justice about jury duty. And when he said what he said, which I will explain to you in short order, I've really gave it some thought. And I thought that it was important to highlight it and the importance of it. And I want to speak to Anna this morning directly to our listeners because it has to do with them of all classes. And so Chief Justice Brian Sykes, he has once again sounded the alarm on a crisis that has been simmering in Jamaica's justice system for decades. His complaint, simple yet profound, is this: professional and well-to-do Jamaicans will go to extraordinary lengths to avoid serving on juries, leaving the burden of this civic duty to the poor. Now, this is not just a passing observation, it is a class issue. It is a justice issue, and it is a test of whether we are serious about democracy in this country. So just think about it, listeners. A jury, by its very design, is supposed to represent a cross-section of the society, a group of ordinary citizens drawn from all walks of life who come together to decide matters of guilt or innocence. It is meant to be the people's voice in justice. The rich, the poor, the educated, the unskilled, all sitting side by side, applying their common sense. That's what you're required, your common sense. And their shared values to the evidence before them. That is the ideal jury system. But what we have in Jamaica is something far removed from that, it seems. When notices go out, summons go out, too many of our professionals suddenly become indispensable to their workplaces, or they fall ill with everything but the most catastrophic diseases. They find excuses, they exploit exemptions, and they slip through the cracks. Again, not my words, but the words of the Chief Justice. And meanwhile, who ends up filling the jury benches? Our bartenders, cleaners, groundsmen, barmaids, the security guards, the working class Jamaicans who cannot escape the system, so to speak, who do not live in the gated communities, who are easy for the police to find. These are the faces of our juries, and make no mistake, they serve with dignity and seriousness. But the question is, should they be the only one carrying this weight? Let us not underestimate the burden here. For someone in a low-wage job, minimum wage job, a week or two away from work is not a minor inconvenience. It can mean lost wages. And even though some employers are benevolent enough to see it as their contribution to society to still pay their employer, that employee can still miss out on tips and other gratuities that they would have gotten had they otherwise not had this duty. Transportation costs to and from the court are not easily absorbed, and yet these are the Jamaicans who consistently answer the call because they have no shield of privilege to hide behind. Now, contrast that with the several other professionals, and those who are rightly exempted do not fall into this picture. But you have people with resources, with stability, with the ability to absorb this inconvenience, as they put it. But yet they are the ones missing in action. And so, justice in Jamaica begins with inequality before the trial even starts. The composition of juries is skewed toward the poor, and that skews the very legitimacy of the system. And if you look at the impact, ladies and gentlemen, first, there's the question of fairness. How can we say a defendant is judged by a jury of his peers if the pool is overwhelmingly working class? Is a wealthy defendant being tried by his peers when not a single person of his socio-economic background is in the box? Is a professional woman charged with fraud being judged fairly if her case is decided entirely by those whose daily realities are miles away from our own? Because remember now, juries must reflect the society they serve. Otherwise, they risk reflecting only one corner of it. And that brings us to the next point of legitimacy. When citizens see that the burden of jury duty falls only on the poor, while the wealthy step aside, faith in the system erodes. People begin to ask, why should I serve if others never have to? Why should I have to sacrifice my wages and my time, my family commitments, when those with privilege escape unscathed? And this sense of unfairness breeds resentment and weakens trust in the justice system itself. And then that brings us to another point of sustainability, ladies and gentlemen. The statistics are dire. At the Supreme Court in Kingston, 4,500 jurors were summoned, only 127 turned up. Only 127 turned up. That is less than 3%. In St. Catherine, some time ago, entire sessions of the circuit court could not begin because no jurors attended, despite over 100 summonses being given. In Montego Bay, recently as well, the Mario Dean case, 300 summonses were prepared and not one juror. Not one juror. The case had to be set for another date. Which means that time was wasted, productivity was wasted. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is not a functioning system. What this is collapse in slow motion. And the Chief Justice has been clear. Let's make no mistake. This crisis demands reform. And while he has often floated the idea of expanding judge-alone trials to increase the efficiency, we must grapple with the deeper issue he keeps raising, which is the inequality of the burden. Because let's be honest, jury duty has become, in Jamaica, a tax on the poor. A tax on time, on wages, on opportunity. It is not the middle class or the elite who are paying this tax. It is those already fighting to get by. And that, I believe, listeners, is unacceptable. But let us go further now. Because the answer lies partly in privilege, but also in culture. In Jamaica, jury duty is often seen as an inconvenience rather than a duty. Too many view it as something to be dodged rather than something to be embraced. But civic duties are not supposed to be convenient. Paying taxes is not convenient. Voting on election day is not always convenient. Obeying traffic laws when you're in a rush is not convenient. But these are obligations that we fulfill because they sustain the very society that we live in. And so jury duty is no different. It is not optional. It is not charity. It is the price we all pay to live under the protection of law and order. And so the Chief Justice is right. The imbalance cannot continue. We cannot build a fair justice system on the backs of only our working class citizens. The boardroom must sit alongside the bar room. The professional must sit alongside the laborer. The wealthy must sit alongside the working poor. That is what it means to have a justice system that reflects the very society that it serves. Now, some will argue that judge-alone trials are the answer, that juries are unreliable, inefficient, and outdated. And yes, there is some merit in the argument for efficiency. But I submit this morning that efficiency without fairness is not justice. If we replace juries entirely with judges, we risk losing the democratic element of our justice system, the participation of our ordinary citizens in one of the most serious decisions a society can make. That is whether a person loses their liberty. And so, perhaps the real solution lies not in abandoning juries, but in reforming the way we manage them. That means ensuring summonses are delivered and enforced. It means publishing the data so the public can hold the system accountable. And it means confronting the class divide head on. No more hiding behind privilege. No more leaving the poor to carry the load. Jury service must be rebalanced. It must be seen not as a burden for the few, but as a duty for all. Because justice, listeners, it cannot be one-sided. Justice cannot be something the poor provide for the rich, while the rich quietly avoid their share. And if we want a Jamaica where justice is real, not just a word, not just a slogan, then every single citizen must step forward. Every class must bear their duty. And every Jamaican, from the watchman to the CEO, must be willing to sit in that jury box. Only then will we have a system that is not only efficient, but legitimate. Not only swift, which we oftentimes complain about, but fair. And only then will the words, justice for all, truly mean what they say. That's what's on my mind.